No, you're muted.
But I could read his mouth.
Oh, good.
I felt the good morning vibe.
Good morning. It sounds like I just missed something that was hard and fast.
The deadline. The election is, as you know, on the 3rd. I don't know if you guys know that there's election coming up this year. I don't know. There's some rumors about it, I heard. But since there's going to be 2 new city council members, and it's this current city council that created this task force, that's why it's a hard and fast line. And we only have 1 HRA meeting in December. So that's hard and fast.
Well, I suppose we can talk about it, right?
Yeah, I don't want to spend overly much time on that topic, only in that there's other topics to cover.
Well, I think from my perspective, if the report's not ready, it's not ready. And that's, maybe we should take a poll and see if everyone thinks it's ready, as opposed to forcing it into a timeline that's in some regards arbitrary.
It's not arbitrary.
No, I understand your concept that it's this city council, but that changes every 2 years.
But it was this city council that created you. It was this city council that created this task force, not created you, that created this task force. And it's this city council that wants to hear the report. So the report, in whatever condition it is going to be heard on December 10th.
So it could be a draft.
But then you're done. You're disbanded.
Yeah. Yeah. And our consultant's fee is...
Oh, she's already done. I mean, her contract was done meetings ago.
Yep. Yep.
She, because the anticipation was never that we're going to meet weekly.
Yep.
So,
I'm very uncomfortable with this personally. I don't know how everyone else feels, but personally,
we've had they extended it 1 year already.
Yep.
The initial timeline was that we're going to have a draft in August of 2019. Then when they extended a year, we're going to have a draft in August of 2020. So what has happened, I think, is we've revisited a lot of issues instead of just letting them go to rest. Also, the bulk of the work and what you're charged with in a large part was creating those goals and strategies. And that part was completed in July. And so the idea was then that you're going to move on to writing phase and that this deadline was completely achievable.
But here we are.
Okay, right. Just for a few minutes, the deadline and the change in the council and all that off the table for a second. Can a task force member, starting with Joe, just regardless of all that, just talk about your qualms about where we're at in the timeline?
Are we officially starting the meeting? Do we need to go through some kind of...
We're officially starting the meeting, so that, Dan, why don't we go through?
Let's start it, and then I'll restate the question. May I have a motion to approve the agenda? Well, then I guess we won't start the meeting.
Steve, would you approve the agenda?
I move we approve the agenda for Wednesday, October 21st. Presented.
I'm sorry. Let's step back. I can cut you off, Steve. Go ahead. Tom needs to mute, I think.
What did you say?
Tom, can you mute?
Well, I think you wanted to talk.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I had proposed adding something to the agenda. I sent out an email, and I just thought at some point in the report or the cover or something, that we should recognize two things that happened in this year. One is COVID-19 and the unknown mystery that it might have impact on housing. Particularly, I'm thinking of senior housing and congregate housing, but could have some other ripple effects. And the other thing is just sort of the fallout from the George Floyd death. I'm not saying that we have to have an answer, but I think we should recognize that housing has an impact on some of the issues around disparity based on race or income. And I just thought these are two huge events that have happened while we've been together as a group, and just to totally ignore it just seemed odd to me. I'm not saying we have to have an answer or agree on a strategy, but I think we need to acknowledge these two things. I mean, they've had one happened 5 miles from Edina, and it's had an impact around the world on issues of class, race, and police handling. I mean, there are issues in Africa and Russia. So
let's go with, so we have, Steve made a motion, you've amended it, and then Steve, let's Steve.
Norm also has something that I think he wants to add to it.
Steve, were you going to say something else before I cut you off?
No, let's get Norm's amendment and then we'll move for a revised agenda.
Okay, Norm? You're muted.
You're on mute.
I'll learn how to do this one of these days. Just for the sake of completeness, I move that we add to the agenda the schedule and the completion of the report.
Okay, so we have a motion amended by Tom and amended by Norm. Do I have a second? I second it. All in favor?
Joe seconded. He was on mute.
Joe seconded. All in favor?
Thanks, Steve.
Aye. Aye.
Janet, did you have something?
Aye.
I'm sorry. Janet, did you want to add something before we vote?
She said aye.
Aye, okay. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so now back to what I was saying earlier. Can we just, because this issue obviously is prevalent, Joe, back to you, talk about your discomfort with where we're at with the report at this point. And then after he's done, anyone else wants to chime in, please do. Go ahead, Joe.
So first of all, I think it's coming along, and I think no doubt we've done a ton of hard work on it. Mike, here's my thought. We have these broad goals and strategies. And as Norm pointed out last week, I think if we take each strategy and identify how we're going to apply that strategy and give examples of where we're going to apply it, the report would be so much more valuable. Today, with these broad statements, so behind it, I think it could be misconstrued, right? Take zoning, for example. What and where are we going to apply zoning changes? We've applied zoning changes. We've made significant changes to zoning in the Southdale area over the past year since we have been together. What does it mean? What is it doing? How do we apply it to other places, or do we apply it to other places? I think that needs to be fleshed out in the report so that it has more specific meaning. Because I don't know that, when I think of Edina, I think of single family housing and Southdale areas. And are we as a task force making recommendations that should change, that single family housing should change, and that zoning should materially change in some of these neighborhoods? I don't think we are, but if you just read the report, could you get that impression? So I think we should take the time to flush it out. We've missed deadlines. I get that. But it doesn't mean we should just compress this last deadline and finalize the report to finalize the report. In my opinion, it's not ready to be finalized.
Bernadette?
I guess as far as taking it to the next level, I mean, I agree. I don't think we should rush it. I think comfort level with the document, we should all have time to read it and analyze it and put our comments in. I totally support that. As far as doing deeper analysis, I guess this is where I get confused on some of the correspondence that's been circulating. Aren't we just making recommendations to the council for further study? I guess I'm not ready to commit the rest of my life to granularly analyzing every single one of these strategies and where they apply in the city and that sort of thing. I mean, to me, I think, aren't we making sort of big picture recommendations you should look at the zoning code? These are some items we suggest that you study, not where should it be applied, where should it be revised, what neighborhood should it be applied to. That's the next step or the next 2 or 3 steps down the road from what we're doing. We're just providing citizen input on items that we feel require further study and analysis by city staff and other experts. But my understanding of our charge is not that we're going to go recommendation by recommendation, strategy and tactic by strategy and tactic and say, okay, on this parcel of land, you do this, or on that parcel of land, you do that. We certainly could provide a couple case studies or something if we wanted to, or if we're not comfortable with how it's written because we feel like we're going to be misinterpreted. I'm all for changing that. But I am not interested in kind of going much further than that, just because I feel like that's going to take another year. I'm running out of steam. So much as I love all of you, I'd sure like to get my Wednesday mornings back. So I think, we need to figure out a way to wrap it up.
Can I insert here because I want to thread the needle between Bernadette and Joe. For instance, I think this report subtly leaves open an avenue for something to happen in Edina, like it happened in Minneapolis, where they've eliminated single-family housing. So I want to address that so that policymakers in the future, if they want to do that, they're going against what we recommended. But I don't see that in the report yet. And so, like Bernadette, I don't want to lay out a bunch of steps, but I want enough detail there that we all agree, yeah, that's what should be happening. Now, city, go figure out how to do it. Next.
From the way I understand it, this is just recommendations. They are not going to adapt or implement everything we recommend. So let's say rezone the single family home to what Minneapolis has done. They are under no obligation to do that. That's my understanding. Am I correct?
You are correct. It's up to the policymakers to decide how they're going to implement anything. And whether or not, and there hasn't been any rezoning. The comp plan has guided land use, Joe, but they're starting the process right now of looking at amending the zoning in the south area, but nothing has happened yet. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Stephanie, I thought that we were given a presentation and it showed the zoning changes in Southdale.
It showed the land
area.
use. It showed the proposed land use of the Southdale area, but did not. It was not zoning change is a very long process.
But it's in process.
Yeah, but Joe's statement would have been correct if he had said there's been significant changes in land use in the South.
Guidance for land use.
Right. No. There's been significant changes in land use in the Southdale area. There's apartment buildings where there were parking lots.
Correct, but as far
that's the correct statement and an important one.
It depends on whether or not it's a regulatory question or an activity question. But anyway, this is a recommendation for ways that you think that housing can be addressed. But as was stated about 6 months ago by Councilmember Staunton, he wanted strategies. He was not at the time looking for tools. We do have some tools, so you went above and beyond. But at the time, the charge was not to create the tools. So yeah, these are just, it's more along with what Bernadette said and what Janet confirmed. And the deadline can't change.
Any other task force members have something to say about this topic? Norm?
Well, I would support what you were saying, Dan, that I think there is a way of threading the needle between what Bernadette has stated, which I think I agree with, and what Dan has, or what Joe has said, which I also agree with. I'm certainly not in support of creating another book or continuing this on for ad infinitum. However, as I look at the goals and strategies in particular, I think we made a very good effort at putting together goals and strategies. However, when I look at them, I try to apply the test. Well, what does it mean? And how would anybody know if those goals were achieved? And some of them are just so broad that I think we would be well served by adding not a book, but a couple of paragraphs to talk about why it's important if it hasn't been addressed earlier in the task force report, and what has to happen, what we believe has to happen, enable us to achieve a goal and make sure that we say, yeah, goal was achieved. And I don't think we're quite there yet. Don't think we're that far away. The other thing is, Stephanie, you said this needs to be completed by the end of day on Friday this week. Is that right?
The issue is the type of layout. It's this program that needs to happen to get the layout in and the formatting in and everything else, because it's not going to look like what's on Google Docs. That's a Word document. To get it into a report type document, it takes at least a week. We have to submit to the Planning Commission and the HRRC by November 12th. No. By November 11th, which is actually a city holiday, so we will not be meeting that day. We have to submit to them, those commissions, so they have time to review and everything prior to their meeting on the 18th. So that's the 11th. So if it takes 2 weeks to do the layout, that brings us to the 28th. of when the layout needs to start, of October. Today's the 21st, and Merritt has to have time to write. I mean, she has to have time to write. And so she was going to write over the weekend, and then it needs to be edited because some of these numbers, we've already found some discrepancy in numbers, and we need to get those discrepancies worked out. So I'm probably going to be working with Merritt over the weekend so she can get to her layout guy by the 28th.
Can I make just another comment? So I agree with what everyone is saying, and particularly Bernadette, that I've loved my Wednesdays back for starters. And that we don't need to dig into every little detail. But here's what does this mean? I'm looking at the report. Consider zoning amendments and pursue zoning changes to encourage split lots to allow infill, single family ownership housing, detached or attached, zero lot line on lots after splitting that are 50 foot or wider. So if someone were to read that, could they conclude that we are recommending that all single family neighborhoods in Edina should be allowed to consider changing the zoning? I don't think that's what we intended as we were writing that portion, but could it be construed that way? And if it could, that's just one example. If it could, does this report become a lightning rod for those who are saying, here we go again, more growth in Edina. We're gonna turn Edina into the city of Minneapolis. And I don't think that's what any of us intended or want, but that's an example of a specific concern I have, is maybe we say that change takes place in a certain area, but something that gives structure to what that means.
But didn't we agree to that? But I feel like we did agree to that. So I see why it's in the report. I also understand, I also don't think anybody ever discussed getting rid of single family zoning or going into our bucolic suburban neighborhoods and bulldozing all the houses. And I mean, of course, so if there's language that we need to put in there to clarify that Edina is predominantly a city of single family homes, we're talking about edges. We're not talking about, materially impacting, but there are cases and areas where it may make sense and it's worth further study, to find appropriate locations for these items. There's always transitional points in every neighborhood, no matter what. But, there's $5 million mansions in Rolling Green, and then you go down 2 blocks and there's apartment buildings. I think some of the stuff is people don't want to see what's already there, and they get too angry about the language and not calm enough to sit down and say, what do we have here now, and how can we continue the good work that's already been done in the city? That's already happened here. How do we continue that in a thoughtful manner? So if we need to have some big disclaimer that says your single family house and we're not coming for it or something, if you think that's gonna people are gonna get that excited, honestly, I don't know who's gonna read this, but besides the city council, but if you think that people are gonna get we're gonna come with us with pitchforks and torches and all this stuff for saying this stuff, that certainly we can tone down the language. But we agreed to that. We all sat around and said, yeah, we should explore these items. And but I'm not prepared to go neighborhood by neighborhood, street by street and say, well, this is an appropriate location. This is not an appropriate location. This is, I think again, that's where we have to entrust our faithful city staff people to do that. But I'm certainly fine with clarifying the language and saying, this is what we don't intend. We're not intending to get rid of single family zoning. We're not intending to turn this into Minneapolis. We're not intending to do this. but we are intending to. So if we need clarification and threading the needle and whatever, all the other analogies people have used, I'm all for it. But I think we need to acknowledge the stuff that we've already agreed on, and we can't keep revisiting it because that's why we're like 6 months behind schedule.
Steve?
Two quick thoughts. One would be on the goal that Joe was just referring to. We could put in front of the language we have on a case-by-case basis, consider zoning amendments and pursue changes. And then, as Bernadette's already pointed out, somewhere else in the document, suggest or declare that we are not recommending wholesale changes to single-family zoning. Just to clarify that, because we are not doing what Minneapolis did, which is say there is no longer any single-family zoning. We are opening up all zoning to allow for triplexes and quadruplexes.
So
we haven't done that. So if we said on a case-by-case basis, that would work.
Yeah, I don't think we've done that, but I'm concerned it can be read that way. So what Joe read, you could own a large lot in Rolling Green and come in and say, I want to split this into 4 lots. And that's changing the nature of Rolling Green. And maybe we're fine with that, but the way it's written, I think, leads to someone saying, I want to buy this 65-year-old home, tear it down, and build 4 houses here. And it changes the nature of Rolling Green. So in essence, even though the single-family zoning is still there, it's not there.
So
In that case, there would be a public hearing. The whole neighborhood would show up, and the council would have to listen to the testimony and make a decision on whether or not they're going to allow the lot split accordingly.
Yeah, but we're not supporting that in this report. And if you read that report, if you read our report the way it's written, I'm concerned that someone could say, hey, they're supporting that. I think Bernadette is exactly right. How do we clarify this? How do we clean it up so that we're saying we're not looking to make these wholesale changes in the city of Edina. We're looking to keep Edina as a community of single-family homes and expand in specific areas, expand housing in specific areas around these strategies. Just clarification and tightening up of the report so that it reflects what we want as a task force.
Merritt, I know you've been trying to talk. You're on mute. Let me unmute you. There you go.
I think it's very easy to make changes in that. You can say on case by case, you could say consider zoning amendments in limited areas to allow lot splits. Instead of saying and pursue zoning changes, which is more active. So you're just saying consider zoning amendments in limited areas, ... So I think that sort of language can be softened.
Oh, and I was going to say, I think if just to get to, I think hopefully address some of the concerns, we can say things like transitional areas, corridors, commercial nodes. I think we can use some generic kind of planning language that kind of directs people that we're not talking into the middle of the neighborhood. We're talking about, again, changes on the margins where it makes sense from a density standpoint and built form standpoint. We're talking about like along Vernon, the conversation is going to be different than along Schaefer Road, for example. There's different places because there's access to transit. We can kind of dance around it without being specific about the neighborhoods and that sort of thing, in my opinion. I think we can kind of direct it to particular areas without saying, in Parkwood Knolls, we're doing this, and in Country Club, we're doing that, because it's going to be different in the neighborhood.
Okay, I would like to remind you of when you first approved this. It was not just in transitional nodes. It was sometimes in the middle of the neighborhood because those requests do come up now. and are looked at on a case-by-case basis. Because in one neighborhood, you may have a 50-foot lot next to an 80-foot lot, next to a 150-foot lot. And the person that buys a 150-foot lot says, actually, I want to split this into two 75-foot lots, which is still bigger than the smallest lot on the block.
I agree, but I think that's where we say density consistent with the neighborhood or something. I mean, like Morningside is a different conversation than the conversation in Rolling Green, you know, I mean, because there are a wide variety of lot sizes in Morningside already. There's people with double lots, there's this, there's that. I mean, there's all sorts of cases, but I think, again, to kind of give people a sense of what we're talking about in cases that make sense. Now, how do you say that in a way that doesn't get people rattled and fired up is, I mean, to me, I would say like where there's appropriate, you know, it matches the existing density of the neighborhood, or it isn't going to substantially increase the density of the neighborhood, or it's in a transitional area where there's inconsistent lot sizes or things like that, where it's like, it makes sense that you're not going to be taking it like a housing development or like what's the word I'm looking for? You know, where the houses are all exactly the same and then lot sizes are exactly the same. And then we're saying, okay, split this one, split that one, do this, do that. I mean, if there's consistency in and I think you leave it alone, but if you're in an area where it's already completely inconsistent, then it makes sense to think about it, in my opinion. Again, I'm not on the council, I'm not making zoning decisions, but I mean, if I read between the lines of what we agreed to, it was that, but we never really got to that granular level. So I'm hoping that captures what we're saying.
Tom?
I'm a little bit confused. When you split a lot and you put two single family homes in it, isn't it still a single family neighborhood? I thought when we talked about switching zoning, we're talking about allowing duplexes or triplexes or multifamily housing. So to me, lot splitting is one issue. And for the record, the council did modify the setbacks in Morningside so you could put your Eden Prairie house right in Morningside. Yeah, well, we got a few like that. Anyhow, I think those are two different things, and I think Bernadette made a great statement about you kind of say, consider, think about, look at these things, because over time, people's choices and ideas will change and their needs will change. So just to keep things flexible, I would go with that, but just to calm down people that think we're going to change the house next door to them, we can put in some qualifying language. I mean, there are some people that are just against, we could build another duplex in the middle of Southdale and somebody's going to be upset about it. So we just have to realize anytime you have change of even the smallest amount, you're going to get people upset. So.
On this issue, I like Bernadette's language, transitional areas, and not changing the nature of neighborhoods. So, if you've got smaller lots in a neighborhood, then we should look at a lot split. But no one should be able to go into a neighborhood and start the trend.
At least that's not what we're recommending. I mean, again, if the council wants to do that, it's on them, but that's not what we're recommending in this report.
Exactly. That's the point I was trying to make early on, was how do we clarify this report so that you get that context in there about what we discussed and, nodes. It's just the way I read it today is it's much broader than that.
Because we have time limited with meetings and we do have hard deadlines, I know some of you have been pretty good. Well, that's a qualifier. Some of you have been more consistent in writing in the Google Doc, and like that type of language or that type of, we just talked about one example, which is great. And some language was proposed. Is this something that you all can do in the next couple days? I mean, we still have an hour and a half, so we can go over some more things, but I want to make sure any other big issues that Merit has do get addressed. But is this something where you all can go into the document and highlight these areas where the language needs to soften, it needs these qualifiers, it needs something else? So we can spend today also talking about the big issues, not that this wasn't one of them, but just in the hour and a half that we have left. I think going through each one of these examples would take longer than an hour and a half. So would you be able to do that?
I can try. I'm probably the worst offender of not commenting in the document, so I add some comments.
Well, and one of the things is, if you don't add comments, your voice is not going to get heard. And those who add their comments, their voices get heard.
Can I ask a clarification here? What are all the comments going to be integrated into the document?
Only comments? What? I'll have that, Merit.
So this morning I've got 20 edits, comments, changes. And then a bunch of other people. How are they treated, each and every one, from the point that any task force member makes a comment?
Merit?
Yeah, that is challenging, because what I find in the comments to date is, say, 3/4 of them are comments that I think reflect kind of group sentiment, or they're more clarity or whatnot, and so I put them in. But there are some that I think reflect maybe an individual perspective, and perhaps the group wouldn't agree. And I'm not comfortable automatically pulling in every comment. We probably end up even with some internal inconsistency on messaging.
Let me give you one of my examples. And so on page 11, there's a bold paragraph that says, most notable is the minimal growth in new mid-sized housing types, dash duplexes, triplexes, quads, and townhomes. So to me, that reads like here's an area that is more important than everything else. And so my comment is, why is that most notable? Why is not the number of teardowns most notable? Or why is not the proliferation of multifamily rental property most notable? Or why is the absence of condominiums most notable? So what would you do with my comment?
I think in that case, I would say that was my first example of trying to highlight something where it would be important for the message to pop out. So, for instance, in each of these sections that talk about housing diversity, it ends with, kind of a general statement that reflects where the biggest gap is between need and demand. We can highlight parts of the text to make that jump out. So there could be other areas and other sections where doing that kind of highlight makes sense. It's not that this is the only one in the entire report. But I don't I mean, there's definitely a need for some of those other stuff. And if you think we need to draw that out, like housing diversification opportunity for Edina, it would be what, missing middle, condominiums, and what else did you say?
What else did I say, or what else did the report say?
What else did you say?
Oh, I said I was just giving examples of other things that have happened here: tear downs, large multifamily rental buildings, the lack of condominium development. I mean, that's basically gone away. So my question is, why is your choice the most notable, and not these other things?
Because it was something that we emphasized, that the group emphasized in the goals and strategies. Missing middle was specifically called out, whereas there's nothing in the goals and strategies that calls out that we need more market rate condominiums as a focus.
So can't we just change it from most notably to notably? I mean, to me, that just seems like, okay, well, maybe Merritt was just feeling really emphatic when she wrote that. Now we change it to notably, and we're noting it and we move on. Like, I mean, to me, I guess, like, time is of the essence, people. Let's go. Like, I mean, write your comments and let her look at them, and then let's go. But I don't think we need to, like, we're down to the wire here. So we're going to have to all get together and, like, massage it.
I agree that helps, but that leads to the rest of the issue that there is basically no land in Edina to do this type of housing, because every time you want to do this type of housing, you're going to be outbid by other users.
That's not our concern, Dan. I agree with you, but that is beyond the purview of this report. I mean, I think, again,
okay. I agree.
So I totally agree, but we got to, like, tend to our own knitting here, because we got to get this thing done.
Steve?
And you won't be outbid if the zoning limits the density to missing middle scale. You're only going to be outbid if the zoning allows something denser.
Okay.
So maybe that's a comment that could be added to clarify that, right? That's a perfect example of where a zoning consideration could come into effect.
So
right, that clarifies for the reader.
Back to my fear. This points to making zoning changes, increasing density in single-family neighborhoods. And I don't think there's support for that within Edina. I mean, I think there's people that want it, but I don't think there's overall support for it. Steve, you've been trying to say something for a while.
Very encouraged by the evolution that I've seen from the initial work by Merritt to what she's been writing most recently. It feels like as she's become more and more familiar with where our heads are at, she's doing a very nice job of putting together something that's coherent and makes sense. And you can see the steady improvement in the clarity of the content as she's given more time to focus and do that. And the thing that we have given her as guidance is our goals and strategies. The things that don't relate to that should be de-emphasized. Things that support those should naturally be brought out in the initial part of the document. So I would suggest that we just continue, let Merritt keep doing her work. I don't support the idea of saying everybody now should leap in and write comments and try to get their point of view built into the end document without discussion from the whole group. I just don't think that works. Doesn't work very well for Merritt. I think people can make comments, but I think we have to allow Merritt to have the freedom to just and incorporate what she wants to write based on what she believes she's heard. She's listened to all of our discussions. She's listened to all the meetings. She's going to take the report off the rails. So I'm very comfortable saying, well, I think we can move ahead and make the deadline.
So one thought that comes to my mind, building on that, Steve, is Merritt made a comment where she includes, where she evaluates the comments that someone makes and says, I think these support the group, and I think these are more personal in nature. So do we ever get resolution to that? So if Merritt took 5 comments that someone wrote and said, yeah, I think these are more personal in nature, and puts them aside and doesn't include them into this report, the person that wrote the 5 comments now sees those missing and goes, I guess my opinion on this didn't matter. How do we bring that to closure?
That's the nature of working on a team. And I think the process that we used as a team was to say, we're going to have a voting system. We'll let everybody declare all of their positions and personal opinions, and then we'll vote. And that got us to some clarity around goals and strategies. And through that process, I think everybody heard everybody else's opinion. We know where people stand, as does Merritt. And yeah, some people's opinions didn't get the support of the group. And that's life on being part of a team. If you could always get exactly what you wanted, you're not really on a team. You're sort of running in your own fiefdom. So,
I guess I'm not saying that. I'm saying, how do we get closure to that? How do we circle back and say, hey guys, these comments don't support the team's view?
I don't know.
And I don't think we have time.
That again. It's not as though we haven't touched on these issues before.
Right, but when you put a report together and you synthesize it, it now can look different than what was being talked about individually, right? An individual goal pulled together in the report that's synthesized into a recommendation can look differently than what we talked about as an individual goal. And I just think we should spend a little bit of time making sure it's all synthesized at a high level, a strategic level.
I'd like to provide a technical answer for Joe. You might remember in the early phase working in the Google Docs that people were putting comments, and then I would reply to the comment. And that is how it could work. And it's what it does is it makes for an extremely confusing and busy document, but it is possible for everybody to write comments and then for me to write a reply like, we'll incorporate or, got rid of this, but that is a technical answer. That's not my recommendation.
Yeah, and to just add to that, Merritt has already made clear that whole process significantly slows down her effort to write. And I think that it goes against what we're trying to accomplish here. I think we have to give her as much freedom as we can to focus and write and clarify. And I think the document will continue to evolve and continue to improve. I think the one thing that we have a responsibility for is to correct errors in fact. So if we see something that is clearly wrong, we need to point that out. But if it's an error in interpretation, I think we have to recognize that our interpretation might be slightly different than somebody else's. And that's going to be true in every single word of this document. So I think we need to give Merritt the freedom to write, not ask her to respond back to all of us individually. It creates a confusing document for anybody else to follow, and it really chews up her time. So I think at this point we have to move on.
I disagree. I am not willing to give that editorial control to the.
Well, I agree with where you're going. I think we need to have one more opportunity to look at the whole document, but I think we need to let Merritt have it another chunk of time to keep writing and clarifying and incorporating what she's heard from the team both today and in the past, and see if we are comfortable with the document. So I think when we meet again next week, we'll have a lot more. But in the meantime, I don't think we want to try to add a lot more content individually that Merritt has to try to process.
Anybody else have a comment on this?
I do. I think I just picked on the one where you say you didn't want to give control to the consultant on the editorial part. I'm like, then why did we hire the consultant? She's the expert. We definitely had made a determination that is an expertise we are not in. So can you explain why you don't want to give editorial control to her?
I think I believe we hired the expert for ability to synthesize what we wanted in a report. So,
Well, I am. Something is just not right there. That's what I'm.
I think that there are still some issues, that there are differences within the group that will never be able to be ironed out. And so what the report is supposed to capture is, the goals and strategies that you guys voted and agreed on, and then the context for where those, what provides kind of the setup for that as far as where the city's at, where there are gaps. But I think there are certain things like, should the report definitively say absolutely no infill in all single family neighborhoods or not? I don't think that's a decision that this group could come to.
Because we have such varying opinions, you mean?
Right. So I just think there are some things that will never be able to be resolved. So it's how are they reflected in the report? For instance, in the example, Joe, that you brought up, where, you use the language, consider as appropriate or whatever, so that you're giving that discretion to the city council for the ultimate decision, but you're acknowledging that it's, just something the task force talked about without flat out endorsing it. So I totally get what you're saying, Dan, and I certainly want this to be a report that you all have some sense of peace with.
Norm?
Two items, two thoughts. One is on the overall timeline, there was an item, approved final report with appendices, on November the 4th. And after that was issued, then we talked about a deadline of Friday end of day. And it would seem to me that I'd be more interested in having our content correct than in having the formatted report available for the first presentation. And so I think that the November 4th date is a more reasonable date for us to complete the wind-up of the language for this report, with the understanding that possibly when it goes to the HRRC co-chairs, it might be a Word document instead of the final formatted report that gets issued a week or two later. I think November 4th is a more reasonable date. Second thought. The second thought is that, Joe, you said I think we all agreed to these goals, but when you look at them in the entirety, they may convey a slightly different message than we had intended. And I think the one of the messages I think would be important is to reinforce that we are not intending in our recommendations to change the character of our single-family home neighborhoods. And this is instead to make some very selective changes in very specific areas and provide some outline as to rationale behind that. So, your reaction on the November 4th date?
That may work. We may not need to present it to the Planning Commission and the HRC in the final layout bound copy with all the pretty pictures in the right location on the page. If that works for Antonio, I mean, we may be able to provide it to them as a Word document in the layout that you all see before you. We need to just check with the layout folks, make sure that does indeed work for them. So let me see, I'm trying to look. Yeah, I mean, and I think if we're very, very, very clear to the HRC, because they may have feedback too. They may say, because they're going to look at things through a race and equity lens, and so they may have recommendations that we either accept or we add on as an addendum their feedback, that it didn't go far enough or it went too far in certain areas. So Merritt, you will check with Antonio to see whether or not that will work for us to be able to provide to him on a later date, and then we present to the HRC and Planning Commission the more Word draft format, as long as we let them know that this is not the final view.
Yeah, I think what it will be a matter of is how, do you want some time spent cleaning up the Word version? I think we would want to do a little cleanup of the Word version,
yes,
which takes a little time. So then there would be the separate step later on of moving it into the official format that looks better. And I think we also need to consider just caveats that, this isn't in a format that meets city standards or consultant team standards for a finished product.
Right. Yeah, I shared with Merritt this week, the city has a branding book that talks about how reports such as this need to look to be public.
So I think you need to confirm it from your side as well.
Yep, I will.
And I think we need to be very comfortable that the appearance of our document is professional and reflects 18 months of effort. I don't want it to look like somebody dashed off a draft with all kinds of funny, out of position elements and nonsensical statements and incomplete phrases. So I think we really need to say, we've got to put our best foot forward. Otherwise, people will look at it and say, well, this is clearly not the work of a team of people who are working very diligently to produce something that was reasonable. This is somebody's quickly dashed off last minute draft. And I don't think we want to give that impression. I'd like us to feel very comfortable with the format and certainly have Antonio and Merritt focus on making sure that it looks very good, that it's not the absolute final formatting.
I agree.
So I think the biggest thing that we've commented on is we want to make sure that we're clear that we're not changing the nature of single-family neighborhoods. And I think Meredith has heard that, and I would expect her to try to incorporate language that reflects that, while at the same time leaving everything else that we've discussed essentially the way it is.
Steve, I'd go even further than that. I think we're interested in changing not just single family neighborhoods. We appreciate what Edina is today, and we appreciate the diversity in housing that Edina has, but we realize that there needs to be continuous movement forward around these areas. And these areas are the goals and strategies we've laid out, and they should be applied specifically in specific areas of Edina. This is not a wholesale change. This is an improvement. This is an incremental improvement in housing in Edina, which takes into consideration the need for affordable housing, which takes into consideration the need for multifamily housing, which takes into consideration the needs that we talked about. But the general gist of it is we live in a great city. It has great attributes. We're not looking for massive change. We're looking for course corrections to affect these areas of housing.
Here's how I would say what Joe just said. I think, and this should be an executive summary, if we don't allow change, bad things happen. If we allow too much change, chances are bad things will happen. And we need to meet changes in demand, and we need to meet, however we look at the Met Council, political, more whatever there, we've got a obligation to follow up on what we said we would do for them. And there is a desire in Edina to increase the diversity of households economically and the diversity of households per race. And that's what we're trying to achieve here by making incremental change.
Are people comfortable with the incremental change being that which is reflected in the numbers that Steve distilled?
Yes. That's how I interpreted what Dan just said.
I'd like to make a couple of comments. I agree basically with what Dan is saying. The only thing I was a little concerned with, and I brought this up with Stephanie, is I would have liked to have seen under the general occupancy some discussion with the number of families with children, because general occupancy to me could be you could build nothing but 1-bedroom units. So I do have a little problem with that. And I think that's a fault that we had with the Max Field study. Stephanie was going to help us find some numbers. Also, one of the groups I think we should still include are the people with disabilities, whether they move into the general occupancy unit or have a specific type of housing set aside depending on the nature of their situation. We did talk about ADUs, and I don't know how you interpret that as changing the zoning. But I'm not a big fan of zoning as it's practiced in this country, frankly. and I know I'm the outlier on that issue. I find it slightly amusing that people who are free marketers want the government to interfere to protect what they've got. But beyond that, I think Dan's sort of moderate language is appropriate, because change is going to come whether we like it or not. And so the idea is to guide it in a way that's constructive for the future of the city. I mean, we need to grow. That's just the nature of it. It's just we don't want a Wild West town that, things pop up everywhere. So I think that Dan made a pretty good point all around. But those are the things I would like to tweak.
Merritt, you asked the question: Are we comfortable with the numbers that Steve you put together from the Maxfield report? Do we define that as changes around the edges or incremental changes? And I noticed from your email, I think this morning, that you talked about the 5,568 additional housing units versus the 3,700 additional housing units in the Maxfield report, or in the comp plan, I should say. So that sounds like a significant change and increase. So what are your thoughts? Is that incremental? Is that a significant increase in demand that we're thinking about, that we're recommending to be satisfied?
What we're recommending to be satisfied is the number that's in the comp plan. And all we're using the Maxfield study report for is to help us understand which should be the priority areas for the council to ensure that they support the most. So I took your advice, and the 3,700 is the base. And what we've done is allocate that across whether it should be multifamily homes, senior homes, affordable general occupancy homes. And that's what the numbers in the latest version of the priorities reflect. So that gets you to the 3,700 that's baked into the comp plan and not beyond.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Steve, is it a fair analysis that the affordable housing stayed the same at roughly 900? So it's a bigger percentage of that allocation?
The 992 and the 3,700 are both from the comp plan, and we're tying to both those numbers. I don't think we've changed anything. Maxfield would have said the demand for affordable housing is greater than that stated in the comp plan. And we have done nothing with that information. We haven't said, yeah, we ought to try to satisfy more. We ought to increase the 992 to 1,040 as a result of that Maxfield information. We said, nope, 992 is it. That's been set by the Met Council as a goal to strive toward, not necessarily achieve, but we're not certainly recommending that we go and be more aggressive than that.
But it relates to that 37 or 3,800 number. So they're from the same source.
Same source.
Got
it. Just I've got a question for you. Since, and I just try to keep the numbers straight, but I cannot keep them straight. Since 2015 inclusionary policy kind of is a little off from the subject matter we are talking about, the 66 affordable housing project is the one that has come fully online. Do we have any other additional units in the 3 or 4 years plan that we can say have been built and completed in that 4-year period? I'm just trying to give a historical background of the pace we are at when it comes to the affordable housing portion. And if it's incremental at that rate, how long will it take us to get to the 992 if we ever achieve it?
Based on our recent track record, we're going to have great difficulty achieving that, which is why we have to make sure that people recognize it's the top priority for the city council when it comes to supporting new housing development.
Well, that is so critical to me because the last few years we haven't been in such a tight crunch economic wise, but we are going to, given the COVID-19. So it's going to be even more challenging attaining the 992 because things have changed that are outside our control. COVID-19 has decimated budgets, and whether you're a business or a local government, we are going to be challenged. So I'm just trying to use our historical data to inform what we are saying and to be cognizant that we have been trying to speak, but we are really not acting inconsistent to make that change. And incremental is such, it's not a word I like. Incremental means you're waiting forever, really, on affordable housing. So I am challenging to say we are really serious, and given the changed environment. All we're doing is recommendation. At the end of the day, the council will make the decision what they want to do. But the reality when it comes to the affordable housing, it's pathetic.
No, Janet, you're correct. I mean, with the last comp plan, the goal was 212 units of affordable housing, and that was between 2010 and 2020. By 2015, 0 of those 212 were constructed. And then 66 West provided 39 units, and then it was stagnant for another 5 years, which was one reason I was hired, because the dial was not moving on that. So in 2021, we will deliver 62 units. In 2022, we'll deliver another 70 units. And in 2023, I think we're delivering 118 units. But it's going to take some dramatic effort.
I think that this is an area that does require. Well, first of all, it's probably the most important part of the whole task force report, and in my opinion, I don't think we're there where we should be in providing an explanation of the plan. First of all, there's the difference between 1220 to 1804, back to 992, and to describe what would have to happen to even be able to reach the 992. I think that requires some further explanation for the reader who doesn't attend every city council meeting.
I just want to note that the comprehensive plan already demonstrates that it can reach, that it has, with the land use policies in the comp plan, the capability to provide room for even more than 1,800 units. So I don't think the city would have trouble being able to do it. It's will they do it?
That's correct.
I just, one thing, it is kind of confusing that we have all these different numbers. I think we've tried to reconcile it before, but I don't want any goal to be set as a maximum, because that can be used as a tool to stop a project that is otherwise needed. So I look at the 992 as a somewhat realistic goal that somebody thought could happen at least 4 or 5 months ago. The 1804 is probably in an ideal world. And I would hope that any of these goals are not conveyed as a maximum. And that is all I'd like to say about it.
I don't think anybody will complain if we overachieve on our goals.
Unfortunately, I have seen cities stop a project because that's bigger than our plan. So I just want to make sure that Merit throws in that qualifier that if for some reason things change in 8 or 9 years, that somebody doesn't get up and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, that's over our goal of 992."
So your point is that our goal is much higher. We'd be delirious if we could reach 992. We'd be ecstatic if we could reach 993, right?
I would. I don't know about the rest of you.
Well, I mean, that's what you're trying to say.
Yep.
In looking at the agenda, Merritt, at one point you wanted to discuss how to express the tools. Do you want to go into that at all now? I mean, it seems like that's an important piece as you proceed forward.
Yes, hi there. So we've talked about tools on and off a number of times. And at this point, what we have is identified tools as defined. And there is also in the comprehensive plan for the housing tools, there's a pretty good matrix that lists all of the tools and which ones would be used to advance certain types of housing. So in looking at that again, I don't know that it's appropriate or realistic for us to make up something that's different or tries to do the same thing, because it seems like that's been done pretty well. I think it's perhaps more just in relation to goals and strategies. Are there certain tools that we think might be most helpful? And I'm not thinking of financing tools because that's really more of a expertise, but should tools, other types of softer tools be kind of elevated, whether it's zoning or policy or things like that. But at this point, I guess I'm not recommending that we dig in to a tool section other than maybe to highlight some that we think would be a particularly good fit.
And that maybe others unpack. Other task force, other committees, staff.
When Tom and I put together the original list of tools, we identified the ones that the city had already identified and were using. And then we identified some more that the city was not using. And we identified some more beyond that were new. So I think we can't just take the list that's from the comp plan. I think that that's a great starting point. We can certainly use that as a format because it's a pretty decent format. There are others, but that's a decent one. And just make sure that we incorporate the additional tools that have been added to the list that was identified in the comp plan.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to clarify something. I did misspeak there. I have both the list you guys put together, and then I have an example from the comp plan that I was thinking we just sort of provide an example and then reference. If it's helpful, I can do a share screen so that people can take a look at what I'm referring to?
Sure.
Okay. One moment. All right. Sorry, I have to get back to my box. Or Stephanie, are you able to pull it up?
Stephanie's on mute, so we can't hear whatever it is she's saying.
The report. You want me to?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep,
Yeah,
I can do that.
4. And then just go to the very end where we have tools.
Sorry, I know I'm speeding in front of you guys here.
That's great.
Come on, read. You guys are good readers. Come on.
This kind of thing sometimes gives me motion sickness. Okay.
I know.
Go up a little bit, like a couple pages. Other way. Sorry. Go backwards. All right. So I think what you see here is what. I go up one more page. This is what Steve, you and Tom put together. Is that correct?
You've reformatted things from what I remember, but that's okay. We can certainly massage this and make sure that we think it reflects all the tools that we put together. And I know Tom has added some beyond that. So we'll just compare our list to what you've got listed here and make sure everything is there as we expect it to be.
Right. So what you see I did do here is, getting from here to, so this is the getting from here to there section.
Yep.
And what we might do on these housing tools is they'd be an appendix that's referenced. What I've done is I put the housing tool types, and they are related to the sections that I went through, what can affect housing. So those 5 categories earlier in the report: financial, regulatory, vision, values, policy, community drivers, outreach, tone, and marketing. And so I thought in the getting from here to there section, we would have sort of a few paragraphs on each of those 5 categories. And then, for instance, in financial, we would reference the set of financial tools that, for instance, are included in an appendix. Tom?
I think our list had some more, perhaps some seldom used tools than this, and maybe you want to put that in as an appendix. I think this was kind of the big thing, but I'll take something like the general obligation funds. Now that can be a controversial topic right there regarding those who hate debt but are the risk. But there's ways of having, I don't know if they still have revenue bonds that can get you the tax exempt status, but take away some of the risk for the city. I've seen where where the bonds are coupled with an FHA multifamily mortgage, so therefore the FHA program takes on the risk if the project goes bad, as opposed to the city of Edina. If a housing project goes bad, maybe Stephanie and all the staff people will have to move into that housing project to make it work. So I think this is a kind of broad list, but and then 2 others may come along. We're talking about a 10-year plan. There may be new programs that become available, so I'm just throwing those out as supplements to these kind of programs.
So let me go back to the idea of having, a couple of paragraphs on each of those 5 areas that would just say what, you know, what tools would be kind of within those areas, and then having, say, this list of tools as an appendix, and then also referencing the comprehensive plan. If people are comfortable with that, it's definitely a section I would want to draft up today and have everybody take a look at, since it would be new. I don't, you know, I wouldn't be comfortable drafting that up and not having folks comment. Are people on board with that idea? Or do you have another suggestion? I'm going to take that as I'll give it a try and send it.
Yes.
Fair.
Yes, give it a try.
Yes, Tom.
Under other tools, you have a note for me. I don't think that that would be a tool. That note isn't consistent with a tool. It's just a note that the federal income tax changes of 2018 kind of take away some of the incentives for home ownership that might have existed back in the 80s or the 70s.
Yeah, this is perhaps just a level of detail that would just not be in the report.
That comment just to let folks know that this has an impact and why there may not be as high a rate of home ownership as once was expected.
Is there any other discussion of this tools piece, or should we move on? Stephanie, can you remind me what haven't we hit on the agenda yet? I do have one thing I want to mention as well.
Yep, let me see. We had overview of revised report structure, and we discussed that pretty much at length the last meeting, but you are showing the changes that were discussed in this new form. Implementation strategy, how to express tools, the paragraphs and the bullet points with some addendum, and discussion of why Edina's history matters.
Okay, so before we jump into C there, I just want to quickly ask a question. Should this report offer sort of some clear guidance steps or suggestions for City Council on how to move forward? So for instance, just an example, there could be a fifth goal added. And the fifth goal would be something like City Council should provide clear and active guidance on housing policies and actions. And strategies would be prepare a housing implementation plan, identify clear criteria for every housing project evaluation, provide leadership to the community on value of housing diversity and affordability, prepare engagement expectations for community input on projects. So that's the notion that you're making some suggestions kind of about how the City Council moves forward, you know, on the hard and emotional subject of housing leadership. And I can put that into a draft or just send it to you as a standalone after this, but I'm wondering in concept, do you think that has value?
It seems like everything you listed there is included somewhere in the city, somewhere in our documents, somewhere in the comp plan. So that's my first reaction, but maybe if you draft something for us to look at, it'll provide at least me some further clarification.
Okay. So I will send that to you later today as well. The reason I thought of it is because there's been this conversation about how the city council, you know, in part looked to this report to provide more clarity on how they should process housing decisions. And I mean, some of that is technical, but some of it is also just process oriented. For instance, do community members or advocacy groups clearly understand what their role is within those decision-making constructs? Has that been sort of laid out so that people know how to engage to their maximum potential and where there might be limits on what decisions they can impact? Or does the city council have clear criteria that people who are watching decisions at the city council begin to recognize and fully understand? And this is the idea that you pull housing policy like any city policy, bike lanes, you know, adding light industry or whatever, that you have criteria that are driven by sort of citywide objectives as opposed to there not being sort of citywide inspired criteria for decisions that often come down to a focus on what people in the immediate area of that change think. So I'll put it together and send. Just want to provide kind of my thinking on that, and look forward to what you guys, you know, your reaction if you think that makes sense or not.
Great, thank you.
Seems like we're winding up a little bit. Oh, sorry, Merritt, go on.
Yeah, I think we can go on to that last piece.
So there was discussion at the last meeting, and I think, Joe, you may have brought this up, regarding why do we have a section regarding the history when this is about, you know, looking for planning for the future. And I don't know if you still have those same feelings, or if if there's still some questions regarding that issue.
I think Norm shared that sentiment as well.
Okay. Because it's still in there. It's not quite the same as it was before, but there's still an aspect of where we've been, to help guide where we're going. And wondering if you're resolved and settled, or if there's still questions lingering out there regarding that element.
Well, let me jump in there. One of the things we talked about last week is that anything that we put in the body of the report should have a direct output in goals and strategies. And conversely, if there's a goal and strategy, it ought to be connected to a discussion that leads up to it. And while clearly this is an important issue in a lot of different contexts, and it's something that we all think is, a terrible history. But the question is this all ancient history where there is no one, if hardly anybody living today, that was in place when these racial covenants were put in place? Does it really have an impact on the goals and the strategies that we have laid out? If not, does it have a place in the report? I suggested no, it doesn't.
I build off of what Bernadette said two weeks ago, I think. She said the report should be elegant and simple. And I completely agree with that and think that although these covenants are horrible and I don't personally agree with them, they don't belong in the report. Maybe we can address them as an addendum, but I wouldn't put things like that in the report. I would keep the report elegant and simple and take that type of commentary. And if we feel a need to include it as an addendum where someone could read the report, understand what the report is really driving at. Information go into an addendum. I think if we structure the report that way, maybe more people would be interested in reading it, right? We take out much of the background information from the actual report into an addendum so that it's easier to consume the actual report. That's my opinion.
Well, including the history is important. It provides context. We are just going to sweep things under the rug and not try to unravel how our historical context has built to bring us to where we are. We're not moving forward. We're just kind of spinning the wheels in the same spot. I am of the disagreement that not delving into it very much, providing context is important. Last week after we met and Stephanie sent out the map showing the parcels that historically had covenants, they really jumped out to me. In my corridor where I live, we didn't have covenants in there. Well, interesting enough, I can say without studying it too much, or I don't have the exact data, but my layman's view, that's where we have diversity as well. So yes, the history does matter to have context of why we are separated the way we are. I believe not doing deep dive, but acknowledging our history so it informs where we go is important. Just in the same way, I'm going to be a little graphic. When I go to the doctor and I have an ailment, they want to find out what did you do the last 2 days, the last year, in order to bring them to be able to tell what's happening with me at this point. It's exactly the same analogy I'm using in our housing. If we do not go back into history to try and say, how did we arrive here? We are lying to ourselves about this report, and we shouldn't waste anyone's time. But I'm not saying we do a deep dive on it, but just give it an acknowledgement and understand its impact. And until we deal with it in an honest manner, we are not going to change a whole lot. That's my 2 cents.
To address Norm's concern, and someone else jump in if you want, because is it does tie into the goal of a diversity of housing, affordability, and those elements. One of the reasons Edina may be in the situation where we have to affirmatively and actively work towards creation of more affirmative housing or more affordable housing is based on the history of the city. And that's why we're in the situation we're in now, not in other communities, is in part because like I said earlier, between 2010 and 2015, not one affordable unit was developed.
But that has nothing, as far as I can tell, to do with racial covenants.
It has, because there is generational wealth. folks that could have, there's this great example a woman gave in Golden Valley. She's married to a fellow from Venezuela. She's the city attorney of Golden Valley. And she talks about her father in the 50s, who is the town drunk. These are her words. Who, white, was able, he was a vet, and he was able to get all these loans and loan product to buy a home in Golden Valley. She currently lives a block away or a mile, half mile away from where she was raised and where her father, the town drunk, was able to buy a home. But she married a man who's from Venezuela. And they found out that there was a racial covenant on their home. So if you took her life and her husband and you were able to go back in time to the 50s to when her father bought the house, they would not have been able to buy a house, even though he was college educated and everything else. But her father was able to. And through, through taking out loans or whatever based on the equity of the home that was raised, was able to send the kids to college. She was able to go to law school, and they're able to use some of their inheritance to put the down payment on the home that she now lives in with her husband. So there is, and that's just going back, to the 50s. So there is this issue of, recycling and being able to generational wealth that allows you to either move in which you were raised, or move up in housing, and that's open to some people and not open to all.
I understand how you feel about that. I don't think those issues more than partly explain the current diversity of race and household income in Edina.
I personally think about it, so in looking at the past, Edina and pretty much all communities in our region in the past used zoning and covenants and kind of community pressure to create neighborhoods based on racial and economic segregation. Given where we are today, where there's a focus on figuring out how to untangle some of these legacy things that have happened in our society, is it appropriate to take an active role to bring some fairness back as far as where people can live despite race and income? So we actively segregated. Is it appropriate to actively remedy that to some extent? Or is it fair for communities that are all single family and wealthy to say, well, that's the way we were created, and it doesn't matter why. We're not going to talk about where that came from, but it's sacred and shall never be changed.
Yeah, I don't think your characterization of what I'm trying to say or what other people are trying to say is correct. Okay, so I'm not doubting these things existed. Okay, I am questioning its present day impact. Now, I clearly said 15, 20 minutes ago, there is a desire to see more racial diversity in Edina. I'm fine with that. Okay, I wholeheartedly support that. But you if you state things that the implication is, here's why we are here today, and that may not be why we're here today, then it serves no purpose. So if I'm not saying this is true, but I'm going to say it for the sake of the conversation. Racial covenants has no impact on the diversity today. If that statement is true, that doesn't mean racial covenants were okay. Doesn't mean we don't look back and go, "Are you kidding me? That's what people did." But if it's not true, and it has no bearing on what our next step is.
Yeah, I just want to make clear, I wasn't implying anything about anyone on the task force. I mean, these are big questions that are constantly asked. I mean, they're asked in, to what extent should we teach about slavery, you know, in Germany? To what extent should they be taught about the Nazi era? To what extent should recognition of history inform policy today by showing how policy got us to where we are? That's just it's a question without an answer. It's really just a policy decision.
How about Norm and then Tom?
By including this section here, it begs the question, so what are we doing about this? We can say, well, we are making initiatives in affordable housing, but that's really an initiative to increase economic diversity. You might say, well, implicitly it's working on racial diversity, but if you feel that this is important, then maybe we need a section in our report of recommendations of what Edina should be doing specifically to increase racial diversity. Now, I'm not suggesting that that should be part of a housing strategy, and it probably ought to be handled in other ways here in Edina to make sure we are encouraging racial diversity. But right now, this section is not necessarily connected to our strategies and goals.
I'm kind of ambivalent about the whole section. I would say if we want to talk about the need for racial diversity, I still would go back to my beginning statement about let's recognize the upheaval from the summer and spring and the lack of opportunities that people have if they are in a low income area because that's the only housing they can afford. Yeah, we can go back over the past. We can argue Thomas Jefferson bought Edina under the Louisiana Purchase and therefore gave $15 million to help Napoleon fight in Europe. I mean, we can feel guilty about all sorts of things if we want to. But it is the past. We could talk about I just think it would be more constructive to talk about the present and that we're part of a greater society. We're part of Hennepin County. We're part of the metro area. We're part of the United States. And that might be the reason we want to help alleviate some of the problems of concentrated poverty or low income. So, like I say, I'm a little ambivalent. I would have played down the thing. The map is interesting because I like maps. But on the other hand, I can see some people take offense, especially if they find their property on it. I think Janet did make a good point about some of the background. I mean, Edina had that cake eater image. You had one neighborhood that wasn't just about white. It was really about being upper class white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And even that Protestant was probably Episcopal and Presbyterian. It wasn't even such some of these outlying Scandinavian religions or something. So I guess that's all I'd like to say is I'm ambivalent about it. Maybe make it as a note. You could have an appendix for those who want to take a deeper dive. But I would talk more about what's today in the greater society.
I do believe, and I think there's scholarship research out there, that what has happened with the racial unrest in Minneapolis is directly tied, and you guys may disagree, but I think there is research out there with the history of access to housing and education, and that this history is very pertinent and relevant to the situation we are experiencing today, be it in Minneapolis or be it here.
I don't know if people can hear me. Am I on mute?
Steve, we can hear you now. Yep,
Steve,
I can hear you.
I like what Tom was saying. I think this is an elephant in the room issue, that if you put out a report and it does not mention anything about race, people will say, well, what were those people thinking? They had the George Floyd incident going on. They had the Minnesota Project going on, which identified all of this racial profiling and illegal covenants. So I think we have to acknowledge that. And I think our response, as Tom said, is that we are explicitly trying to deal with that by fully supporting the goal of 992 affordable units. We're not passing any judgments on who's going to live there. We simply think that we have a need for more affordable units, and we think this helps address an issue that has been prevalent and is still prevalent, and leave it at that.
I am going to say it is important we acknowledge that it's the elephant in the room. 2016, the gentleman who was stopped on France Avenue was a black man, and he was told by the police that he didn't belong here. So we can deny about our historical context all we want, but the fact of the matter is it still has relevancy to our life today. And we are not saying it's going to change everything overnight, but at least a problem that cannot be faced and be an act can never be solved. But if we attempt to address it, we will be confronting the real issue and attempting to change our circumstances. Minnesota State is a very progressive state, but I'm sorry, it is not progressive for some of us, both on the wealth outcome, the housing, the education, the economic. The statistics are stacked against some of us. So, and it all results into housing. And housing is a very basic necessity, but it's the foundational thing for everything else that you achieve in life. And policy that affects that bears the outcome. The policies that generated segregated communities to today are what still we are wrestling with today. So we can deny all we want all day, but we are part of creating policy right now, and we can change the trajectory or we can cement it the way it has always been. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Joe, you're unmuted.
So I'm hearing a lot of the same thing, that we all feel that we should acknowledge this in some form or fashion, acknowledge our desire to build on more racial and financial diversity in Edina. And beyond that, we don't have a lot of strong comments on what that means and who that should serve. And so should we recognize that, and including the George Floyd incident that has brought to light how important housing is, and we're addressing that through this affordable housing component of this task force. Do that right up front in the executive summary, and put the deeper dive into an appendix for people that want to understand it, and for people that think that that's an important part of that the history is an important part of where we are today. But if we address it right up front, just very, very globally, and at a high level, that we, as a task force, support that. We support the desire to expand racial and financial diversity in Edina through housing. And to Tom's point, the pandemic has some bearing, and George Floyd also has bearing on this. Maybe just have some statement of some sort supporting that or acknowledging it at a minimum.
Hey, Joe, I think that's a great suggestion about doing something like that in the executive summary. So let me take a shot at adding those words where you guys can all see kind of how they got integrated, and then see if that's something that works for folks.
So you're going to try to put that in the executive summary?
Kind of what Joe was just saying.
Yeah, no. My question was, you're gonna try to integrate it as statement in the executive summary.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you. That would be a great start to trying to finalize this.
Then it doesn't go unsaid, right? Then it's, oh, of course they acknowledge that. Of course they understood that those were pieces of housing.
So I just, before we run out of time, I don't know if there's any resolution, back to my comment earlier about editing and merit. I don't know how we take into account everyone's comments. Joe spoke to this a little bit, but I'm just, the record saying it's still out there, and for lack of a better phrase, we're going to have to muddle through it for the next week.
By the way, I'd like to add a comment. And Joe, I support your recommendation of including the reference to George Floyd and what we're trying to accomplish. Put that into the executive summary. And second, I would like to applaud you, Merritt, in that reading the latest version of the executive summary and the introduction. I thought you did a very, very nice job of transitioning from a previous version to including the spirit that I think really reflects where we're going. So thank you for that.
I agree with that. Thank you, Merritt.
Yeah, absolutely. One more comment on the structure of the report. We had talked about an opportunity for each task force member to write a paragraph or two about their own personal views, and including that in an addendum. It's not in the table of contents. We've not discussed it. Is that something we want to do, or is that something we are saying we shouldn't do?
I want to do that. Anybody else have a thought on it?
I'm sorry, are we suggesting that we are going to publish the equivalent of a Supreme Court decision with opportunity for people to write a statement supporting the majority or dissenting? Is that where we're going with this?
Well, that's not how I would phrase it, but for expediency, yes.
But we need to appoint one more task force member before the report's adopted, so we can get that opinion in there too.
That was funny. That was very funny.
Yeah, so that, Mary, you would need those relatively soon, correct?
Well, our Senate can run through quick, no problem.
No, I meant your comments, your letter to the public.
Does anyone besides Joe and I want to do that?
I do not have the desire to do that, but thank you
Anybody
for offering
else?
the opportunity.
Anybody else?
I am not sure what purpose it serves to have our individual. I know, I mean, all of us have very strong opinions, but what benefit to the council is that?
We got 2 for, 2 against. Anybody else?
Bernadette dropped off.
If
Oh,
if you want to add comments of support, I think that would be appropriate. If you have comments of dissent, we should probably hash those things out before the report is issued.
How do you how do you hash that out?
Well, I think Steve put it fairly well before. When we work as a team, not everybody's opinions are going to be fully expressed, but we should feel like the document is a sufficient compromise.
I think that's a good point, Norm.
I think if there are letters of dissent, it weakens the whole report.
Okay.
And your 18 months were.
So, Joe, do you want to drop the proposal?
No, I don't think we should drop it. Well, like Steve said, even in the Supreme Court, there's opportunity for dissent, right? And it doesn't weaken. It doesn't weaken the. It doesn't weaken the outcome. It expresses that maybe there are other considerations that came into the outcome, and the majority didn't rule, but that they were heard and they were part of the process.
I'm in agreement with you, Joe. It's just that if it's just the two of us, it's difficult to move ahead. So
yes, clearly, I think we table it for next week.
Well, I am gonna.
There's that much for today.
We are already in a very divisive, nationwide and even community-wide. Trying to have more dissenting voice on our group just doesn't bode well for us. I am against putting our personal views there. So, I mean, we all know we are not all totally in agreement, but it doesn't serve us as a group. It doesn't benefit us to air our differences publicly like that. So,
how about this? The idea is lying on the floor, gasping for breath, but we're not going to put a final stake in it at this point. We're going to let it sit for a few days. Anybody else have a closing thought?
I just want to bug in your ear that for the meeting at the HRC and Planning Commission on the 17th, and for the meeting with the HRA, the chairs will be doing the presentation, and there will need to be a PowerPoint and a summary, and as a committee, you guys can decide. I mean, we do not want this to be a 4-hour-long presentation. We're thinking it'll be a 15 to 20-minute presentation, so there's lots of room for questions and answers at the end. So in the upcoming meetings, I think you'll want to spend some time focusing on what are the high points that you want to present to the HRA and the planning and the commissions. I think it is not inappropriate to say that there was, that this was a struggle, that there were a variety of opinions, that there wasn't like this unified all the time voice, and that you had to plow through some disagreements.
Okay.
I think that's okay.
Merit?
To be a little idealistic, I think it might be healthy even to acknowledge that, because as a country, I think most of us would agree that we have to do a better job talking together about our differences and moving towards decisions that don't just rip each other apart. And so it may be good to say, yeah, there were differences. It was hard. This was challenging. you know, we really had to come together as a team and work through these things. And so that's my little idealistic pitch.
Well, you did mention that on page 7 in the introduction in one of the paragraphs, but I think the language should be a little stronger, and I think it should be in the executive summary. Anybody else?
I'm going to leave that on the floor for
Okay.
a decision next week.
Your own analogies. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks for hearing.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Maren.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.